We will begin by examining North Carolina Amendment 1 with the way of knowing of reason. First, let's define our terms. Ethics are defined as the moral principles and rules of conduct governing an individual. Subsequently, morals are the fundamental truths that distinguish between right and wrong. Philosophers Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mill presented two separate arguments describing how to determine ethics and morality, which we will apply to the Amendment 1. We will start with Immanuel Kant, who used duty and motive to determine the morality of an action. Again, let's define these terms for clarity. Duty is something that one is obligated to do, and a motive is the goal or objective of a person's actions. According to Kant, ethically, you should follow your duty. You can determine your duty by generalizing a situation. For instance, if you wanted to tell a lie, you would have to ask, what would happen if everyone lied? This situation would have extremely negative consequences. No one would ever tell the truth. Therefore, it is your duty not to lie, because lying would have negative consequences. Motives, not consequences, should determine the morality of an action, he said. Additionally, he advocated for motives based on reason, not on feeling. To use Kant's moral guidelines, we must define the motive of marriage. Is it to procreate, or is marriage's purpose to symbolize a couple's affection for one another? Because Kant argued that motives should be reason-based, we can assume he would view the motive or purpose of marriage as procreation. Kant would use the natural sciences to justify that biologically homosexual marriage does not fulfill a reasonable motive. If the purpose of marriage is to procreate, then homosexual partners cannot contribute. If you were to pose that question, what if everyone participated in homosexual marriage, you would find that the human race would face extinction. Therefore, it is your duty to participate only in heterosexual marriage. In this way, we can determine that Kant would be against homosexual marriage. Aside from ethics and morals, let's discuss the natural sciences that we touched on before with Kant. As Sonia said, if the purpose of marriage is to procreate, then gay marriage serves no purpose. Biologically, it takes a man and a woman to have a baby. Many who argue against homosexual marriage say it is unnatural and that it cannot provide what marriage should provide, offspring. This argument is a double-edged sword, however, and we run into a knowledge problem. Does this mean that couples who do not plan to have children, or who cannot have children, should not be allowed to be married? They, just like homosexual couples, would not be able to create children. The other counter-argument is adoption. Gay spouses would be able to adopt children who need a home. But what about the family unit? Some argue that despite a gay couple's ability to adopt and therefore raise children, they should not, because they cannot fulfill the traditional gender roles that male and female parents do. With two moms or two dads, a child would not develop properly compared to a child raised in a heterosexual household. Being raised in a homosexual family unit could skew their values, attitudes, and sexual identity. In response to these claims, the American Psychological Association, or APA, compiled a report on lesbian and gay parenting and on the development of children raised in homosexual households, citing 152 studies dating back to the 1950s.
Moving on to emotion, in contrast to Kant, John Stuart Mill was another philosopher with views on determining morality. Mill upheld utilitarianism, which is the very simple belief that an ethical or moral action is one that maximizes happiness. An action is more right the more happiness it creates, and more wrong the more unhappiness it creates. To determine the morality of gay marriage with utilitarianism, we need to compare a world without gay marriage to one with gay marriage. In the former situation, heterosexual spouses would be as content as they are now, but there may be unhappiness generated by homosexual couples that are unable to marry. In the latter situation, heterosexual couples would still have content marriages, and we would see an increase in happiness due to married homosexual couples. Essentially, homosexual marriage is moral according to utilitarianism because it would increase overall happiness. When considering Amendment 1, utilitarianism would argue it is immoral because it decreases overall happiness by prohibiting gay marriage completely and by taking away rights from other types of unmarried couples which would cause unhappiness. The Establishment Clause in the United States Constitution calls for the separation of church and state. However, many people use the area of knowledge, ethics, as a basis for making a political decision, such as how to vote on an issue. The personal ethics held by many people are derived from their religious beliefs, which often elicit a strong emotional response. This presents the knowledge problem of determining when separation of church and state conflicts with your personal views, which may be derived from a religious institution. On one hand, using the Bible's stance on homosexual marriage as a basis for supporting the NC Amendment 1 interferes with the Establishment Clause. However, prohibiting a person from using their religion when voting on an issue is limiting their personal voice and freedom of expression. This knowledge problem indicates that emotion plays an inherent role in making a vote that is based on an individual's ethics. To answer our real-life situation question, one arrives at a moral decision regarding the amendment through the analysis of the amendment and the two opposing sides, which is what we have just done. For our knowledge issue, we come to a conclusion that in order to make a well-supported knowledge claim, such as a moral decision regarding the amendment, one must use both reason and emotion. By having an argument with reason, you have facts and objective sources that cannot be questioned. However, the danger in using solely reason is a loss of personal voice and connection with others about the topic. You cannot formulate a personal opinion about the issue unless you incorporate your emotion into the formation of your decision. Even though the amendment has already passed, as a group, we arrived at the moral decision that NC Amendment 1 is morally wrong. Our rationale is very similar to those of the student interviews. From a reason perspective, the amendment does more harm than good by not recognizing gay and unmarried couples as domestic legal unions. From an emotional perspective, it doesn't feel morally right to limit the rights of a certain group of people. We've seen both sides of the issue. We began with a reading of the amendment, followed by logic versus emotion student interviews, and the in-depth analysis of varying sources regarding gay marriage. We discussed the pros and cons of those two ways of knowing and the supporting philosophies behind them, and we identified knowledge problems, such as adoption and separation of church and state. Since we are all opposed to the amendment, the analysis and discussion may have been biased. We might have been more critical of an argument that supported the amendment rather than one against. However, we remain unbiased when we discuss the TOK topics of emotion and logic.